Just yesterday, I turned a corner and ran into McDonald's, a Chipotle's, and the Seattle's Best Coffee back to back to back. Right? Which, by the way, McDonald's was very crowded, so thank you. We appreciate that. I don't go there myself, but nonetheless, I'm sure the McDonald's people are very happy for you. So I take a pretty broad view of what I mean by popular culture and the way to understand its location or its significance in the world. Obviously, as we talked about, I perceive or think about these things in terms of the pervasiveness of American products, but also as an area of a zone of global contestation. Not necessarily a hostile one, not necessarily a mean-spirited one, just one where people are properly saying to themselves, how do we assert our identity? How do we explore our identity? How do we shape things? But at the same time, in the reality that there is this enormous behemoth sitting out there, right? And so that China is one loci of such a challenge, right? There is this thing called the United States and American popular culture whose position has been preeminent and prevalent for a long time. There's this rising power called China that's wealthy and confident and aggressive. And so what does that mean for the way the universe is going to work? And so I thought I'd think through at least one, as we'll talk about in a little while, this talk is actually stimulated by a question that occurs entirely randomly, and I'll get to what that was when it comes up in the talk. But like so many of my research projects, they start from what the heck is going on? And then eventually I end up some kind of an answer. So that's kind of a rough outline of where I'm going. So while this isn't going to be shocking to most people in this room, nonetheless, for most of us, certainly in political science, we tend to view our social political interactions in terms of fields of conflict is too strong a word, competition, pursuit of goals, pursuit of interests, right? Popular culture is such a field out there in the world, right? It's a source of profit. It's an agent of enculturation. And after all, its elements contain, I would argue, they contain and express cultural content. They are particularly appealing to younger people. And in the great scope of social, political, global conflict anyway, this seems to be extraordinarily important, right? Because all cultures depend on the continuity of younger generations to newer generations or to older generations, and if you can shape that younger generation, you can reinforce or challenge culture. This is particularly, it seems to me, acute when the cultural variables, if you will, the cultural norms are being challenged by what are perceived by alien cultures really fast from a long way away. If you think about those three things together, my culture is being challenged by some alien culture, it's being challenged very, very quickly, and it's being challenged from a long way away. And one of the ways I think about this, right, is that if you just think about after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after the end of the Cold War, lots of societies around the world had the bomb of American popular culture dropped on them all at once. They had no time culturally to adjust, no time culturally to adapt. Most of us live in societies where we're pretty sophisticated in handling cultural challenges, cultural ideas, new things, and we freak out, right? When strange new things come in and some new video game comes along and that new video game is going to destroy the world, Grand Theft Auto or whatever it is, right? It's suddenly going to create a great moral crisis or whatever it is. Now imagine in a society that isn't used to that isn't used to, in fact, dealing with these things on a consistent basis. It's just a lot. Of course, again, coming at it from a political science point of view, it's absolutely the case to me. It seems like that popular culture is a soft power tool or even just an artifact of foreign policy and foreign relations, and that there is a distinctively American view about how this stuff ought to work, about what the goals, intention, functions of this are, right? This is largely a reflection of the U.S. self-understanding of its position in these matters, right? One of the remarkable things about growing up in the United States, right? I don't have to pay attention to most of the rest of the world if I don't want to, because you're a long way away. And you're not going to bother with it. Right? It's not like you're Belgium. You're a big flat place between France and Germany. It's a different game. Right? That is what Belgium is, right? It's just a flat place between those two countries. You're not to do that to me. Right? And so I have an insularity. And that insularity is deep. I mean, it's embedded deep. A whole lot of people I know don't think twice about the rest of the world a year. And so that sense of our position in the world, that, yeah, of course we believe in free trade and cultural products. Why wouldn't we? We win. And we get to the degree that we believe or come to believe that Americanization and globalization have become cognate ideas, right? Of course we think globalization and popular culture and trade and popular culture and expression of popular culture from an American point of view is perfectly acceptable, because why not? Right? Why not? Now, shockingly enough, the rest of the world doesn't seem to agree. Shockingly enough, the rest of the world thinks about, wow, these kind of social and cultural connections that are being built across borders are being built on a frame that maybe we don't like. With terms, concepts, frames, identities that are challenging to our understanding to the way. Again, not a problem from my point of view. So I win. Right? That popular culture can create challenge ways of life. It can, the way we think and express ourselves.
Right.
It can, in fact, be a force in cultural and political change over time. Which, by the way, is not necessarily a bad thing, right? There's all kinds of things that in cultures and societies, I think most of us in this room would think was a good thing if they would change. But nonetheless, you have that foreign stimulation, you have that question of the locus of control, and thus, in much of the rest of the world, the presumption is that the trade in popular culture, the expression of culture, popular culture, needs some kind of regulation. Now, there's nothing new about this. I've run these quotes around for a while. I find them fun. In 1927, the Daily Express was complaining about American movies. Complaining that British movie audiences now talk America, think America, and dream America. We have several million people, mostly women. That seems really interesting when that little clause gets stuck in the middle of that sentence. Because men don't go to movies. I don't know what the deal here is. And nonetheless, due to all intent and purposes, are temporary American citizens. Nor are the British the only ones that complain. The Sunday Review, which was a U.S. magazine in 1949, was complaining about television. This is 1949. Complaining about television, basically saying that it's destroyed our imagination, destroyed our good taste in communication. With the exception of radio and television, it's the worst thing ever. They hadn't found, Twitter yet. It also speaks, however, to the inevitability of the moral panic, right? Every time there's a new communication mechanism, every time there's a new communication device, it's the thing that's going to ruin us all. One of these days they're going to be right, by the way, nonetheless. So, when you think this through, and I was thinking this through in terms of the relations to China, it's clear that China has multiple sets of goals when it comes to their desires with popular culture. One, of course, it's part of their system for jobs and manufacturing for economic growth. It is an agent of their world as a global superpower and economic superpower. They have strong interests in managing the internal access to and the use of externally produced popular cultural products, especially U.S.-based ones. As we'll talk about in a little while, China has been extremely aggressive about putting up all kinds of barriers between its people and the use of external products. So it wants to engage with them, but it wants to engage with them on terms and in language that it thinks can be valuable to it. It's a global presence in popular culture making and distribution. There's no question that one of the themes or goals, however, has been to develop and use popular cultural products to enhance and express Chinese values globally, right? If Americans get to do it through American popular culture, the Chinese obviously think to themselves, why wouldn't we get to do it too? Perfectly reasonable thing to want to do. All of these goals, of course, are inextricably bound with American popular culture, with American political, social, and economic agendas. Right? China, after all, is mass producers of licensed and not licensed American products. Right? We kid ourselves about this. There's an enormous amount of unlicensed American products through there. And of course, they are competitors with American products and American agendas in a world already awash in American popular culture. Indeed, in the most popular form of auto racing in the United States, NASCAR, stock car racing, if you're familiar with stock car racing, the rule of thumb in stock car racing, and I know this isn't the way in F1, is it's perfectly okay to block. If I'm ahead of you, you don't just have to be faster than me, you have to get past me. And I'm entitled to try to stop you from getting past me. And you're entitled to knock me out of the way if you have to. It's a rough sport. But nonetheless, the point here is that China doesn't just get to wish its way to the top. It has to actually win. And on this path, China has an extraordinary array of tools that it can use to advance its agenda. An extraordinary array of tools that it can use to advance its agenda. It has, after all, its market size. Right? The promise of we could just get access to the Chinese market, we're all going to get richer than we ever imagined anybody would ever be, is an appeal. Americans or only Westerners could make pop culture. Long creative. In the business or engaged in an effort to build a meaningful challenge to American popular culture on a global affairs, they have the capacity to do so. This is where the title, the initial title anyway of my talk comes from, The Soft Power of Hard Cash, because it's the willingness to use these kinds of tools which can be seen to shape the products that American popular culture industries make. And then once they make those popular culture industries, or the popular culture products, then they go out into the world, whether it's Europe or elsewhere in the world, having been shaped in the background without necessarily any of the final audience knowing that that game has been going on.
Comment je fais pour couper le... Il me capte le micro du Mac. Il capte le micro du Mac. Oui. Et je ne vois pas qu'il capte le micro du Mac.
Ouais, qui capte le micro de la webcam.
Non, le son, en
La
fait,
webcam.
non, je veux couper ce micro-là. Tu vois? Ah non, là c'est celui-là. Mais par exemple, si je fais ça,
Non, c'est la webcam. C'est le micro de la webcam.
ah. Alors attends.
But obviously that's a problem, so magically enough, Hong Kong was having this eruption of pro-democracy protests. An NBA executive who's they had been in Hong Kong. The NBA executive for the Houston Rockets actually tweeted something along the lines of, we stand with democracy in Hong Kong. Pretty innocuous, pretty something that anybody from a democratic society would be willing to say. And aside from the fact that there was an enormous amount of pushback against it, LeBron James, the great superstar LeBron James, also criticized the NBA executive and said, you should keep your mouth shut. This is Chinese market and we don't want to mess it up. He was a little bit less blunt than that. But there's a version of that. Michael Jordan, famously, remember Michael Jordan, the basketball player, right, from the 1990s, was once asked the question, why don't you ever speak out on progressive causes? You're a black man, you understand what it's like to be a black man in America. And his famous quote back was, Republicans buy shoes too. Couple of examples of this. The second one actually drew political ire in the United States, because of course it did. But anyway, if you're familiar with the movie Red Dawn and all, the original version of Red Dawn came out in the 1980s. Actually started a bunch of people who went on to become superstars. But it involved the Soviet and Cuban invasion of the United States. And for some reason, they sent the Cubans to Colorado, and I don't know why you send the Cubans to Colorado. Wouldn't you send the Russians to Colorado? But anyway. So there's this guerrilla band of fighters in a high school that form up called the Wolverines, and they get going. But anyway, they remade this movie in 2012, and when they originally made it, China was the bad guy. And then some producer somewhere along said, oh, crap. We can't have China as the bad guy. They won't let into the country. They didn't anyway, but they won't let into the country. So post-production, they shoved a whole bunch of stuff that made it either overtly or look North Korean. And then you have to ask yourself the perfectly reasonable question, can North Korea invade the United States? The answer is no, by the way, which is why nobody watched the movie. Top Gun Maverick came out this last year. I actually just watched this again very recently. This is a couple of cutaway shots here. The one on the left is from the original Top Gun, just famous United States flag, UN flag, Japan, Taiwan. And some of the early promotional materials for the new Top Gun movie, they very carefully edited those two lower symbols to a pseudo-esque Japanesey kind of thing. I mean, it is a geometric shape with a white and red. And then over to the right, kind of vaguely hints at it, but isn't Taiwanese, again, because they were seeking access to the Chinese market. This actually caused a great deal of political, we have our political histrionic politicians, right? So,
il me descend carrément le son.
Yada, yada, yada. They put it back in, so they...
Yeah.
Original Top Gun. But not until after they decided not to let them...
Alors que là-bas, non.
Et là,
moi, ça fait pas.
There are some limitations we ought to be aware of. One is just the reality of co-optation, right? No matter how good
de la, le micro.
Chinese stuff is,
Oh putain.
there's always the problem that why can't
Parce que
Americans
j'ai une
just do it
carte
better,
Black Magic ici, acquisition. Je
right?
croyais que c'était la Black Magic, mais non, c'est la GT.
Sorry.
Putain,
Yeah, now mind you, Kill Bill and The Matrix followed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and the House of Flying Daggers, but you get the spirit of it, right? Some of these movies are deeply, the Chinese movies are great, but they're not American big budget action movies, right? And so there's always that challenge. You have, of course, as this conference is about, the fact that the market isn't just wide open. You have to compete with other highly capable, highly talented people who make globally appealing products and who lack the political baggage of China and Chinese politics. Right? It's hard to be pro-China right now in the world. And China seems to be working very, very hard to make it harder to be pro-China in the world right now. Of course, the existence of the American juggernaut, talked about already, the difficulty in coming late to the game, and the question of political transparency. This is one where, if we have more time, I can talk about another occasion, but the ability to make a story that sells across multiple cultures and multiple societies is a skill. Not everybody can do that. And so I just recently had occasion to watch Matt Damon's movie, The Great Wall, which is a Chinese movie starring Americans intended to go to a global audience. And I watched this movie and I have no idea what the movie's about. It's a zombie movie, but it's not a zombie. It's a weird flick. All right, and that doesn't mean it's not possible. It just means that it's a process to learn how to do that. And of course, you just have the simple reality of current state repression in China has led to the profound suppression of creativity with significant political and cultural fallout, which has severely constrained their capacity, it seems to me, to engage on a world stage. So I did think this is where I get back to this question of the idea or the concept that kind of made me wonder what was going on. Okay, what to well-financed groups like Chinese producers and others that we may see emerge moving forward. To use the American system, which is already well established and already the cultural baggage associated with the American system has already been integrated globally. You don't have to teach the world to accept American stuff, they already do. Whatever baggage that comes with, and of course it comes with a whole host of baggage. That's already working in well-established distribution networks, that's already deeply embedded in global cultural practice. I spent a year teaching at the University of Helsinki some years ago on a Fulbright, and one of the things that struck me, I was teaching an article about Disney at one point in time, and one of my Finnish students raised her hands and said, it never occurred to me Disney was American, because I've had it my whole life. And I'm like, Disney's very happy to hear that, right? Disney's very happy to hear that, right? So, in other words, you don't have to build the world anew, you just have to figure out how to make the world that exists and bend it into something you find useful. Right? In other words, you're taking advantage of U.S. popular culture to work around the limitations in Chinese industry. You're avoiding some of the political social tensions associated with Chinese politics, et cetera, in the modern world, and framing or shaping in another dimension of soft power. And where this really comes from is what I'm going to call the Midway effect. This is the movie I watched one day, or actually when I saw the advertising for this movie, I was like, why the hell are they making that movie now? Many of you may or may not know this is actually based on the remake of a